Welcome back to the Elias Makos Show. It is the third hour of the show. Are you like me? Over the weekend, were you looking at the news and the reports and the social media posts about what was happening in Russia and saying to yourself, what the heck is going on? Now, Vladimir Putin is blaming the West and Ukraine for an aborted mutiny. The Russian president addressed his nation after, well, simply put, a wild weekend. Mercenaries calling a mutiny and then calling it off in just under 24 hours. The head of the Wagner group. And again, this is another thing where I'm like, what is this group? You hear about this group, and have no idea just how it works. Pushing for a rebellion, accusing members of the Russian military of gross mismanagement of the war in Ukraine. So what happened over the weekend? Let's try and demystify it. Let's just try and explain it for everyone. Kyle Matthews joins us, the executive director of the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies. Kyle, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me on again, Elias.
And I find you to be a must-follow on Twitter, and I see you posting about international affairs all the time, and this is that's in your wheelhouse here. But I have seen even the experts of experts kind of scratching their head over what happened over the weekend. I'd love to know, how did you view what happened in Russia?
Well, I began to see the Wagner Group and Prigozhin start to speak publicly, voicing anger at the Russian military leadership, and starting to really kind of counter Russia's narrative of what was happening in Ukraine. We don't know everything about what happened, of course. We don't know where he is yet. We don't know if he's still in Belarus. But just to watch this movement where 25,000 troops are supposedly leaving the front and marching towards Moscow and making within 100 to 200 kilometers of Moscow and not being stopped by the Russian military and actually being welcomed by people, Russian civilians, was just a shock. It showcased that Putin's control of everything is not as strong as we thought it was. It just shows that the total, I guess, narrative about what is happening is that's coming out of the Russian government and its state-controlled media is just completely false.
So there's an interesting point, right? So what we saw over the weekend sort of proves that whatever attempts at blackouts of information, trying to control the flow of information into Russia on social media, that's clearly not. There's large swaths, and even the military, that are upset about the war in Ukraine.
Well, they are, and we're getting reports that that a very high number of Russian soldiers have been killed, like upwards of 100,000, if not 200,000, plus probably double that of those who have been injured. And so that's one aspect. We've also heard about just, that the Russian troops are ill-equipped, that they've taken prisoners, forced them to fight. They're taking sometimes immigrants, forcing them to fight. And everything coming from the Russian government is one of a victorious state when, in fact, as U.S. Secretary of State Blinken made a joke a few weeks ago, said that Russia used to be the second most military in the world. It's now the second most powerful military in Ukraine. And also Prigozhin basically also, he came out and publicly said that the reasons for invading Ukraine to denazify Ukraine was totally made up, that there were interests within Russia to control Ukraine for economic purposes, individual economic interest of generals and so forth. And so the entire rationale for the invasion of Ukraine put forward by the Putin regime was countered by Wagner and by the Wagner group, the Wagner leader. And it just kind of, it was no surprise to me because I've been following this closely, but I think for Russians to hear this themselves just makes them question what's really happening. And is this the end of the Putin era? I think that's what everyone was thinking over the weekend.
Yevgeny Prigozhin, you look at him and you say, oh boy, I wouldn't want to get into a fight with this guy. And then you hear he was a caterer before. There's an incredible backstory here. What else can you fill in on this guy above those types of skim the surface details? What can you tell us about Prigozhin and his place right now in Russia?
Well, I mean, he rose to his position because he was backed by Putin and his interior circle. He Yes, he started off as a caterer. He ran a hot dog cart after getting out of prison when he was in his early 20s. But he's really risen to take over this, which is basically a private army with direct links to the Russian state, and has led this army not just in Ukraine, but before that in Mali, fighting jihadist groups. He's played a role in having his force also provide security in the Central African Republic and across the African continent. So this is a very nefarious group that has conducted military operations without any authority of the UN and has rights abuses. But really, you see that he's risen to and I get this is a mistake from Putin. You create a private military that's more powerful than your own troops, and it'll start to question your decisions and the bloodbath of which the Russian military has put the Wagner Group in Ukraine and others in harm's way. So it really just shows that this is a private military that's grown, and what happens next? Will they move to Belarus, these soldiers? Will they be brought into the Russian military? We just don't know.
We're with Kyle Matthews, Executive Director of the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies over at Concordia University. Kyle, and I think you almost got there in a previous answer here. Let's talk about Vladimir Putin. And do you now have a timer on his lifespan here in Russia and his leadership of Russia?
Well, nobody really knows, and there's speculation that Putin, kind of went into hiding over the weekend. Unlike Zelensky, who stayed in Ukraine to fight the invading Russian forces, Putin kind of disappeared, and there were rumors that he was going to fly to St. Petersburg. But he definitely is weaker now than he was just a couple of days ago. Just seeing the Wagner Group move in, take over multiple cities of 1 million people plus. There are some stories that he also occupied a nuclear power plant in Russia. So Putin is just seen as having lost control. His narrative is now kind of being shown to be not true about the origins of the war and how the war is going. And now that's why you see Putin basically trying to blame the West, saying the West was behind this mutiny, which is absolutely ridiculous. But Putin is. I think he has less power today than he did a week ago, and it's going to be very difficult for him to govern. And some people fear that he will turn to excessive force to regain control of Russian society politically and militarily, and he might put forth a purge of people, an imprisonment of people. So that's where this might go. But I think the future for him is one that's not going to be as rosy as he thought it was.
Why'd they stop? Why did the Wagner Group in Prigozhin, why did they stop their final approach to Moscow?
Well, we don't have all those details yet. Putin came up and called a threat and wanted to have him killed. Prigozhin said that he was just seeking a protest to replace the Russian military. And there were some documents circulating yesterday on social media that said the UK intelligence services had intercepted evidence that the Russian state had threatened to commit some very violent acts against Prigozhin's family in Russia, as well as other high-level family members of Wagner Group members in Russia. So that's what we know so far, but I'm sure more will come out in the days ahead, but we really don't have that much information. It's pure speculation at this point.
There's that saying, be careful what you wish for. When it comes to Vladimir Putin, a lot of people have been wishing him away, wishing there would be something that would happen in Russia where he would no longer lead that country. If people get their wish and that happens, what next? Do we have to be careful about what we're wishing for?
No, this is the case. I mean, people, I'm not a fan of Putin. I agree that he should be face justice at the International Criminal Court for the crimes he's committed personally and directed in Ukraine, including the transfer of children into Russia. But there are other people in Russian society, in political and military circles, who are even more hardcore ultranationalists than Putin, who are calling for nuclear weapons to be used. So that's one dangerous fear that people have. Who could replace Putin? And then the second nightmare scenario is, what if there is a civil war? What if Russia breaks out into multiple states, and then you have multiple nuclear-powered countries or breakaway republics of which a nationalist, neo-nationalist could take control and use these weapons against NATO members or Ukraine. So these are the scenarios that nobody really likes to think about, but could actually happen. It's not if Russia destabilizes, it could become a bigger security issue for NATO and Western countries like Canada, not just Ukraine.
Kyle, we had about 10 minutes on air here, and you've done a spectacular job here explaining what's going on. I'm really happy we reached out to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on.
That's Kyle Matthews, is Executive Director of the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies over at Concordia University.